Hey, you've moved out already, right? I wouldn't want to live in a house with someone as ugly as you. Sister-in-law's laughter echoed over the phone. Hearing her voice, which seemed to thrive on belittling others, a mix of anger and pity welled up inside me. She mocks, laughs, and torments. She's a pitiable sister-in-law who can only find joy in others' suffering. The old me would have let her walk all over me, but those days are over. From now on, I'll break free from sister-in-law's grasp and live my life. I'll live freely where no one can hurt me. I can't wait to see sister-in-law get her comeuppance. That's what I'm really looking forward to. My name is Brittany, a housewife in her 40s. I married my husband Joshua after a workplace romance. For a while after our wedding, we enjoyed our life together. But when we heard of my father-in-law's passing, we decided to live with my mother-in-law. Mother-in-law has always been frail and often falls sick. She's quite old now, and we didn't want to be too late. Joshua said,
"My sister is there, so it'll be okay."
But even in her late 40s, sister-in-law is jobless, and I couldn't trust her to take care of her mother-in-law. So we moved into the family home, and I quit my job to care for mother-in-law. I remember sister-in-law barely greeting us when we arrived, and Joshua sighing in frustration. Mother-in-law apologized, saying, "I'm so sorry." But it wasn't mother-in-law's fault. The unreliable sister-in-law was to blame. From the start, I disliked sister-in-law and didn't want to get close. If possible, I wanted nothing to do with her. But sister-in-law started to involve herself with me. Her demands were always petty. "Buy me this," she'd say, or, "Don't get too confident." It seemed sister-in-law held a grudge against me. I wished she'd just ignore me, but she kept picking bites. "Brittany, I'm not in the mood for fish today. Make me a hamburger, a big one." Joshua was busy with work and couldn't help much with the chores, so I juggled mother-in-law's care and household tasks. One evening, as I served grilled fish for dinner, sister-in-law, who had made herself a regular at our table, complained. "If you don't like it, don't eat. But I'm too busy to make hamburgers. If you want one, make it yourself." "Why did you make it if I didn't ask? I said I want a hamburger. Make it now." "You're such a failure as a wife. Can't even fulfill a simple request? I wonder why Joshua married someone like you." Sister-in-law's loud protests continued, even as Joshua tried to calm her. "I never agreed to this marriage. I hate that my brother married such a terrible woman. Just leave." It hurt, hearing her constant insults. At first, I wanted to understand sister-in-law. I didn't blame her for being jobless. I thought maybe she had her reasons. But living with her made it clear she didn't. She just wanted to laze around. Joshua even gave her an allowance from his salary. I wanted him to stop, but he said he was worried about her. "Joshua recognizes my efforts. That's why he gives me money. But you, Brittany, are such a terrible wife. I can't feel any respect from you." Sister-in-law always used her status as Joshua's sister to complain. "Respect me, I'm his sister. Give me money, I'm his sister. Pamper me, I'm his sister." Just because you're a sister-in-law doesn't mean you're someone special. If you don't act respectably, you can't expect respect in return. That's why I never indulged sister-in-law's whims, and I plan to continue standing my ground, even if it upset her. One day after shopping, I returned home to find my Boston bag at the entrance. Inside, my personal items and clothes were packed. I knew immediately who did it. I called out to sister-in-law, and she emerged from her room, feigning innocence. "This was left outside. You did this, didn't you? Why?" Showing her the dirty bag, she nonchalantly replied, "Today's the big trash pickup day, right? I thought I'd have it taken away." "This isn't trash. I use these things. Why would you throw them away?" "Well, you're as bothersome as big trash. You've been imposing on us, manipulating Joshua. It's so annoying. Bothersome? I was taken aback by her audacity. Are you going to go this far just because you have hostility? Could she be mentally unstable? I struggled to find words, and she laughed crudely. You playing the victim won't work. The real victim is me, having my dear brother stolen by a woman like you. Stolen? I never intended. To me, it's as if you did. If I knew you were this wicked, I'd never have approved of the marriage. Her sudden outburst left me stunned. I was the one who was taken aback by his attitude. I can't stand living with you. I want a life where I don't have to see you. With that, she stormed off. I regretted not having a proper conversation. That night, discussing the issue with my husband, he seemed deeply troubled. It was comforting knowing he was on my side. We considered moving, but mother-in-law was the main concern. Mother-in-law didn't want to let go of the house she lived in with her late husband. We figured she'd absolutely refuse to move elsewhere. I could understand mother-in-law's feelings, and it felt wrong to force her out. But I didn't think we could persuade her to move willingly. As time went on, my relationship with sister-in-law became strained, and we'd argue every time we saw each other. Seeing us fight constantly, both my husband and mother-in-law would often intervene, worried. I felt terrible for causing them distress. I wanted to resolve the situation on my own, but couldn't find a way. Every time I saw sister-in-law, I'd get irritated, unable to control my anger. Seeing my distress, my husband suggested I take a break and visit my parents' home. He mentioned he could take some time off work and would take care of mother-in-law during that period. Above all, he was concerned about my relationship with sister-in-law. He thought that if I took some distance and had time to cool off, maybe we could find common ground. If I continued to clash with sister-in-law daily, it would stress out both my husband and mother-in-law. I wanted to avoid that, so I agreed to my husband's suggestion. So I decided to take a break and stay with my parents for a while. I'd occasionally check in with my husband, asking about mother-in-law and sister-in-law. But as days passed, I could hear the fatigue in his voice. When I asked if taking care of mother-in-law was too much, he said that that wasn't the issue. He had come to understand how annoying sister-in-law could be. Now that he was in my shoes, with me gone, sister-in-law started pestering him. Of course, he couldn't give in, so he refused. This made sister-in-law furious, and she went on a rampage, breaking things around the house.
I finally get how tough it's been for you, Brittany. I'm sorry I couldn't support you more,
he said, his voice choked with emotion over the phone. Unable to stay calm, I called sister-in-law. Please, stop troubling Joshua. Do your best on your own. But sister-in-law just responded with annoyance, showing no sign of understanding. Then, she dropped a bombshell. So, you've moved out, right? I don't want to live in a house with someone as ugly as you. Turns out, sister-in-law thought I had separated from my husband, not realizing I was just visiting my parents. In front of my sister-in-law, I hadn't discussed the possibility of returning to my parents' home, so I guess she didn't know the details of the situation. It was the first time in my 40 years of living that I realized that there are people who are so good at making others suffer. Sister-in-law was truly a terrible person. I couldn't let her continue like this. I had to do something. So, I decided to take action. Yes, I've left. I won't ever come back. Finally, I won't have to see your face anymore. She laughed and hung up. I called my husband again. I asked him to come to my parents' house immediately. When he arrived, I played him the recording of my call with sister-in-law. I had instinctively recorded it, fearing something might happen. Hearing it, my husband's face turned pale, and he apologized. It wasn't his fault. Sister-in-law was to blame. I have a request. I proposed cutting ties with his family. I wanted him to sever all connections with mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Though concerned about mother-in-law, he agreed to discuss it with her. A few days later, my husband and mother-in-law visited my parents' home. deeply apologizing to me and my family, I was informed of my husband and mother-in-law's decision. They deeply regretted not being able to stop my sister-in-law's excessive harassment towards me. They were even willing to cut ties with their own family to ensure my well-being. So, my husband severed ties with his family, and we began living with my parents. I wasn't sure how sister-in-law reacted to this, but after a while, I received a call from sister-in-law, who we were supposed to have no contact with. "Mom's in trouble. Come home now." "Mother-in-law, what happened?" "Just come home quickly." All she would say was that mother-in-law was in trouble and needed us. When I asked for details, she wouldn't give a clear answer. I found her behavior suspicious and decided to discuss it with my husband later. When my husband returned from work and I told him about the call, he immediately phoned mother-in-law. She was fine and seemed to be in good spirits. When asked if something had happened, she simply said she was doing surprisingly well. So what was the big issue? I couldn't quite grasp what my sister-in-law was saying, but from what I gathered, she's grown tired of living with her mother-in-law and is considering moving her to a nursing home. Fortunately, it seems there's some inheritance left from her father-in-law, so she could afford a decent place. She discussed this with sister-in-law just today. Upon hearing this, sister-in-law exclaimed, "You're abandoning me, and vehemently opposed to the idea." I suspect that's why she reached out to me. To somehow stop mother-in-law. She contacted me to somehow stop her mother. My husband had given up on sister-in-law, but he was concerned about mother-in-law and had been sending her living expenses. But if mother-in-law moves to a nursing home, my husband, who's grown weary of sister-in-law, might stop the financial support. I could easily imagine sister-in-law panicking and trying to stop mother-in-law, especially since she doesn't work. Without that support, she'd struggle to get by. We both sighed at sister-in-law's selfish actions. Despite sister-in-law's objections, mother-in-law moved into the nursing home recently. Just as things seemed to settle, our home intercom blared. With both my parents and husband out, I was the only one to respond. Through the intercom, I saw sister-in-law causing a scene outside. "Bring out my brother now, you thief! How dare you take both my brother and mother from me? You're terrible! Come out, I'll teach you a lesson. Apologize now!" Seeing her rage, fear overcame me. I knew if I went out, she'd harm me, so I stayed put. Sister-in-law kept shouting, kicking our plants, and banging on the door. I contacted my husband, who said he'd come home immediately, but his workplace was far. While I was pondering what to do, I heard a voice through the intercom.
"Hey, what's going on here?"
It was the police. They restrained sister-in-law and took her away. Relieved, I went outside and explained everything to the police. After this incident, my husband and I decided to move far away. Now, in a faraway land, the couple is working hand in hand. Apparently, after learning of sister-in-law's actions, mother-in-law decided to cut ties with her. She declared their relationship over and hasn't contacted sister-in-law since. My parents sought damages for the destroyed plants, which must have amounted to a significant sum. Mother-in-law regretted not cutting ties with sister-in-law sooner, and even sold her house, saying it was a necessary step. She apologized to me for not acting sooner, but I felt I owed her a thanks for her support. Thanks to my husband and my mother-in-law, who were my strong allies, I was able to leave my sister-in-law behind, so I thought I would be the one to thank her. I heard sister-in-law now lives in an old apartment and works part-time. It's her first job, and she's struggling to adjust. Sister-in-law was an extremely slow learner, so it would be difficult to educate her. Well, I wish her the best. My husband and I are thriving in our new environment. My husband even got a promotion and is more dedicated to his work. I support him by preparing delicious meals and keeping our home tidy. While I was with my sister-in-law, there were days when I was too stressed to do these things properly. But now I can enjoy supporting my husband without stress. While he often thanks me, I'm more grateful to him for standing by me during the sister-in-law ordeal. I'm determined to continue supporting him as a devoted wife.